Germany tried to engineer the future of energy and ended up paying $500 billion to break its own economy. Picture yourself as the head of a giant industrial firm. You produce steel, chemicals, machinery, maybe cars, the physical backbone of modern civilization. Your factories sit in Germany, the industrial heart of Europe, a country famous for discipline, efficiency, and engineering brilliance. It's 2023. You step onto the factory floor expecting the familiar hum of machines. Instead, you're met with silence. Not because demand disappeared. Not because workers walked out. The machines are quiet because switching them on would bankrupt you. Electricity has become too expensive to use. This is not a dystopian novel. This is the real-world outcome of Germany's energy experiment, often called the Energiewende, the energy transition. The plan was marketed as a noble leap into a cleaner, greener future powered by wind, sun, and moral superiority. Germany invested more than $500 billion, yes, $500 billion, trying to design an energy utopia. What did that investment deliver? The highest electricity prices in the developed world, a shrinking industrial base, and one of the most bitter ironies imaginable, wind turbines being dismantled so coal mines can expand underneath them. Today, we're breaking down how one of the world's richest and most advanced economies walked itself into one of the most expensive self-inflicted wounds in modern history. To understand how Germany reached this point, we have to rewind to around 2010. Back then, the world looked very different. Smartphones were just becoming mainstream, and Germany's energy system was actually in good shape. The country relied on a balanced mix of nuclear power, coal, natural gas, and renewables. Nuclear energy alone supplied roughly a quarter of Germany's electricity. It was reliable, stable, carbon-free, and cheap. The long-term strategy made sense: keep nuclear plants running as a dependable backbone, while gradually scaling up renewables over several decades. At the center of this plan was Chancellor Angela Merkel, no climate-denying populist, but a trained physicist with a doctorate in quantum chemistry. She understood the numbers. She understood base load power. In fact, she had initially extended the operating lives of Germany's nuclear plants. But then, in March 2011, disaster struck in Japan. A massive earthquake triggered a tsunami that overwhelmed the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear facility. It was a tragic event, but occurred thousands of miles from Germany in a seismic zone, involving aging reactor designs. Germany, for the record, does not experience tsunamis. Logic would have suggested a technical review, perhaps safety upgrades. But energy policy is rarely driven by logic alone. It is driven by fear, and fear spreads fast. The anti-nuclear movement, led largely by the Green Party, seized the moment. They had opposed nuclear power since the Chernobyl era, and Fukushima was framed as proof that nuclear energy was inherently unsafe. Under intense public pressure, Merkel reversed course. Within days, she announced a complete nuclear phase out. 8 reactors were shut down almost immediately. The rest were scheduled to close by 2022. This moment was the original fracture in Germany's energy foundation. Imagine demolishing a perfectly functional furnace in the middle of winter because you plan to install solar panels someday. That is essentially what Germany did. Scrapping 17 paid off. 0 carbon power plants before reliable replacements were ready. From that point forward, costs began to spiral. Germany poured enormous subsidies into renewable energy through the Renewable Energy Sources Act. Households and businesses paid surcharges on every kilowatt hour to fund wind and solar expansion. Electricity prices soared, eventually reaching nearly 3 times the average paid in the United States. Yet despite all that spending, Germany's carbon emissions barely declined for years. Why? Because when the wind stopped and the sun disappeared, as it often does in Northern Europe, nuclear power was no longer available. Instead, Germany burned lignite coal, one of the dirtiest fuels on Earth. In trying to save the environment, they sidelined their cleanest energy source and replaced it with the worst possible alternative. With nuclear gone, Germany needed a backup fuel to support intermittent renewables. Natural gas became the obvious choice. It burns cleaner than coal, ramps up quickly, and is essential for industrial heat. There was just one problem: Germany didn't have much gas of its own, so it turned east to Russia. For years, German leaders believed in a policy of change through trade, the idea that deep economic ties would soften political conflict. Cheap Russian gas flowed through pipelines like Nord Stream 1, with Nord Stream 2 waiting in the wings. By 2021, more than half of Germany's natural gas came from Russia. The entire manufacturing model depended on it. Chemical giants, automakers, and steel producers assumed low-cost energy would last forever. Warnings came from everywhere: Eastern Europe, Ukraine, the Baltic states, but Berlin dismissed them. Even public criticism at the United Nations in 2018 was laughed off. That laughter ended in February 2022 when Russian troops entered Ukraine. Sanctions followed. Gas flows were restricted. Prices exploded, at one point rising nearly tenfold. Factories that once paid manageable energy bills suddenly faced costs that made production impossible. The German government rushed to bail out utilities and cap household prices, spending tens of billions to prevent economic collapse. But the damage was done. Nuclear was gone. Fossil fuels were politically taboo. And the one fuel Germany relied on had become a geopolitical weapon. The consequences showed up quickly in German industry. Nowhere was this clearer than in Ludwigshafen, home to BASF, the world's largest chemical producer. This single complex consumed as much gas as an entire small country. In 2023, BASF announced permanent downsizing in Europe, cutting thousands of jobs and closing key facilities. New investment shifted to China, where energy was cheaper and policies were predictable. BASF wasn't alone. Major manufacturers began relocating production or future investments abroad to Eastern Europe, North America, and Asia. Economists politely called this structural change. In reality, it was deindustrialization. Germany doesn't dominate social media or software platforms. Its strength has always been making things. When that capability erodes, so does the foundation of its middle class. Meanwhile, the technical problems of the energy transition kept piling up. Wind power is concentrated in northern Germany, while industry is clustered in the south. Massive transmission lines were supposed to bridge this gap, but projects were delayed for years by lawsuits and local opposition. As a result, wind turbines in the north are often paid to shut down because the grid can't handle the electricity. This so-called redispatch cost consumers billions, paying for power that was never delivered, while southern factories burned gas and coal to keep running. Then came the heating crisis. To cut emissions further, the government pushed a law effectively banning new oil and gas boilers, forcing homeowners toward heat pumps. On paper, heat pumps are efficient. In reality, most German homes are old, poorly insulated, and incompatible without massive renovations. Costs ran into tens of thousands of dollars. Public backlash was fierce. Political support collapsed. The law was watered down, but not before panic. Buying of gas boilers locked in fossil fuel use for decades. Ironically, Germany did hit its emissions targets in 2023, but not because the transition succeeded. Emissions fell because factories shut down. Industrial output dropped sharply. This wasn't climate victory. It was economic contraction disguised as progress. To make matters worse, Germany's electricity grid became far dirtier than France's, which relies heavily on nuclear power. Electric cars charged in Germany often run on power many times more carbon intensive than those charged just across the border. By 2025, the picture was bleak. Economic growth stalled. Political divisions deepened. Industries searched for exits. And the rest of the world took notes. Developing nations didn't see a blueprint to follow, they saw a warning label. Germany wanted to lead by example. Instead, it demonstrated what happens when ideology outruns physics and economics. Is there a way forward? Possibly. Germany still has talent, capital, and technical expertise. Nuclear restarts are discussed, though difficult. New technologies like hydrogen may help someday. But the lesson is already written in bold letters. Energy policy must be grounded in reality. You cannot wish an industrial economy into running on weather alone. Germany spent $500 billion learning that lesson the hard way. The rest of the world would be wise to learn it for free.